How can someone retire off 4 to 6 properties in the short to medium term? Well, firstly, the old age pension is not enough. We know that. But even superannuation is not enough. Even people who've got a large amount of superannuation, let's say $400,000, it sounds like a lot of super, but it's not. Because if that superannuation is invested at 5% in anything, say in investment property producing rent, or say in shares producing dividends, it's going to produce 5%, and that's going to be about $20,000 a year. That's just not enough. So what we like to see people do is accumulate a minimum of 4 investment properties. It's often better to go on to more. We really would like to say 10, but 10 can be a little bit daunting initially for a lot of people. So let's just start with 4, and certainly after we've gotten you to 4, then we'll talk about the next 4. Why 4? Well, if you were to accumulate 4 investment properties, and the typical price of those properties is, let's say, $400,000. Let's say it takes 10 years to accumulate those properties. That would be very conservative because most people achieve it in less than that amount of time. Now let's say eventually that those properties double in value. I'm not going to quote the often overquoted 7 to 10 years. Let's say 10 to 15 years to double in value, just for the sake of being very conservative. So that would be 4 properties totaling $1.6 million that would double in value. So eventually that's going to be $3.2 million worth of property, of which half is equity and half is debt because it's had to be financed by debt in the first place. So eventually we've got $1.6 million worth of equity. Now there's a number of things that you could do with that, but let's say that that $1.6 million worth of equity was to be retained and essentially the debt was to be extinguished, because when we retire, really, who wants $1.6 million worth of debt? So eventually you're going to end up with $1.6 million invested again at, let's say, 5%. That's a return of $80,000 a year, which is approaching a decent retirement income. So certainly we can go on from there, and certainly the numbers are obviously a lot better when we look at 10 properties. Now, each individual circumstances are different, and it's a matter of finding the right strategy for each individual person. However, what it often looks like is a combination of capital growth orientated properties and cash flow properties. What's important, once you've started to accumulate more than one into 2 and 3 and 4 or more properties, is it's the cash flows on the portfolio as a whole that's important. What each individual property is doing doesn't really matter so much. So imagine being in a position where you had 10 investment properties and the balance of that entire portfolio was, let's say, a cash flow neutral position. You could just get on with the rest of your life, concentrate on work, concentrate on family life, and whatever you do outside. So with 10 properties, if one of them is not rented for a period of a couple of weeks in between tenants, if another one of them doesn't grow in value for 2 or 3 years at a time because it's at a bad stage of a particular property cycle, none of that really matters. The entire property portfolio will be balanced, and it's often a matter of lining up or alternating between capital growth orientated properties and cash flow properties. And there's another bonus. If we're doing our job right, the cash flow orientated properties will grow well in value as well. So you've got the best of both worlds.
The advice that's given in the general media tends to be at the top of the market. Very few commentators come in at the bottom of the market advising people to buy. It's not until the property has had a really good run that all of a sudden the press is saying now's the time to buy. When the way we would look at that, it's probably getting close to the top of the market when the mainstream media are talking about it, when people are getting advice to buy a property from the taxi driver or their mate at the pub. It's too late to buy in that
John,
cycle.
you've got training in risk management. How does that influence you in the properties you pick?
The risk management background makes me look very conservatively at the projects initially. Well, I look at all the pros and cons of a project. It's very easy to look at all the glossy parts and forget about the possible negative influences a project can have. So I'm probably a bit harder on the projects we take on because we give them a good going over. And after years of assessing the projects that we've done, I can now work it out in a couple of minutes or even a couple of seconds really by looking at the numbers, how it stacks up, and then I go back to the office and we'll verify with all the data, talking to individual independent assessors to look at, make sure the rents and the valuations and all those other things stack up.
John, specifically, what criteria do you look at in terms of where to buy for cash flow?
The things we look at closely is the diversity of the economy in the area that we're targeting, the infrastructure spending, who's spending what where, in particular government departments, major private enterprises, and Woolworths is a good gauge actually, where they're building new Woolworths or Coles shopping centres. You know there's something happening there, and it may not have hit the front page of any of the newspapers yet, but that's where we'll start looking a lot more closely at it. The vacancy rates in those towns, how much available property is there, and how much land is available for redevelopment, and the longevity of the projects that are happening there as well. So they're the major key indicators for us.
John, you're currently renovating a place in Italy, as I understand it. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the Italian project, we were looking over there after several holidays and thought it'd be a nice place to spend some years in our retirement, early retirement. We finally found a property in Abruzzo. It's about 3 hours directly east from Rome, almost on the east coast, in a little hilltop village, half hour up to the ski fields and a half hour down to the beach. So it's in an ideal position. Whilst the property isn't expensive to buy there, it is an expensive and time-consuming exercise for the renovation. The renovation's taken 2.5 years, and it's nearing completion now. But getting the work done isn't always easy.
John, what are the mistakes people make when buying positive cash flow properties, and how can you buy them safely?
A common mistake, I think, buying cash flow positive properties is that people don't do the research, or they don't look at the research. Our business is all about research. Before we take on a project, we look at all the fundamentals to make sure it does fit. And I'm always surprised by the number of people that will actually buy without even investigating and wanting to see copies of that research. I know we've built a strong rapport with some people, and they trust everything we say. But if it was me in that position, I would still want to see the research. Other things I think people get wrong, they don't look at the longevity of projects, and that's certainly a must. If the project is a short-lived project in a community, it'll be a boom and bust situation. So there needs to be a long-term project. And the other thing, I think people should reinvest the surplus incomes from cash flow positive. If they're getting cash back, you should be looking at putting that into maybe a high growth property, and getting the best of both worlds.
I started investing before I turned 21, and have been investing for the past 14 years, which gives my age away a little bit. Now at the age of 35, I've learnt a lot about what to do and what not to do in property investing. I haven't come from a family that has had a lot of money. I haven't come from a family that has had any experience with property investing, and I wasn't on a very good income, but it was just something I wanted to do. My first investment property I purchased was in Kedron in Brisbane. It was a cheap unit that cost me a huge $54,000, I think it was, and that was a big decision and a big commitment back then. I kept this unit for 12 months and then sold it. I made around $30,000, if my memory serves me correctly, but that's when my passion started with property and I was hooked. I then celebrated, as I was probably earning around $30,000 per year at the time, so it was like earning a year's wage for doing nothing. So as you could expect, I had to keep investing. I was hooked. So I bought another 2 properties, sold another one, and bought a few more after that. I have bought and sold many properties over the years, even renovating. This was probably one of my mistakes. It was very time consuming for me, and I was very inexperienced at the time. I don't have 20 properties yet, but I'm well on my way to reaching my goals and enjoying my time with my family in the process. Property for Profit has been recommending properties in Calliope, Gladstone over the last 12 months. Knowing this was once again another great investment we had on offer, I had to buy one. It's probably been one of the best decisions that I've made in my portfolio. Not only have I made fantastic capital growth, but also the rental has increased quite dramatically over the last 12 months. I know for property investors, investing in property for the first time is a huge step and can be very daunting, and that's why I want to be able to help and hold their hand in taking that first step. Working together with them, showing them how to invest, where to invest and what to look for, just so they can build wealth, with a balanced portfolio, whether they're looking to retire early, retire comfortably, or just to help them live a more comfortable lifestyle.